Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Clearly, the things are not pretty normal when it comes to the bilateral relationship between the United States of America and India. In the latest of the developments, President Donald Trump, through an executive order, has imposed 25% additional tariffs on Indian goods which are imported to the United States of America. Earlier, he had announced 25% that was implemented from 1st of August, and later on in an interview he also had threatened of imposing further tariffs, which he has done so through an executive order. What he had to say in that executive order, let me quote, "I find that the government of India is currently directly or indirectly importing Russian Federation oil. Accordingly, and as consistent with the applicable law, articles of India imported into the customs territory of the United States shall be subject to an additional ad valorem rate of duty of 25%, unquote. Now, why is this happening? We'll be trying to analyze, assess and understand as the situation that has developed over the last couple of months as far as this particular bilateral relationship between these two countries. The leaders of two had been very closer to each other, and they've been really speaking high of each other in the recent past. And what exactly went wrong? There has been a response. As far as the Indian side is concerned, the External Affairs Ministry responded by saying that the U.S.'s targeting of New Delhi over the buying of Russian oil is unjustified and unreasonable. At the same time, it has accused the West of double standards, pointing out how Europe traded more with Russia in 2024 than India did, and how the U.S. continues to import chemicals and fertilizers from Russia. It also said that the U.S. has actively encouraged it to buy Russian oil so that the global crude prices would stay under control, while the West could reduce its dependence on Russian energy. It further went on to say India will take all the necessary measures to safeguard its national interests and economic security. We'll also be trying to understand as to what sort of options Indian authorities have at this particular point in time in order to counter such a move by President Donald Trump. At the same time, Russia, which had been silent throughout this particular spat between India and the United States of America, has come up with a statement, with the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov saying New Delhi can choose its own trade partners. Let me quote that statement. "We believe that sovereign countries should have and have the right to choose their own trade partners in trade and economic cooperation, and to choose those trade and economic cooperation regimes that are in the interests of a particular country," unquote. In this particular program, the number of points that we'll be trying to understand from our esteemed panel of guests who would be joining both us in the studio as well as online. Firstly, going a little back in history, Prime Minister Narendra Modi happened to be one of those few leaders who visited Washington after President Donald Trump took over the office for the second term. At that particular point in time, both the leaders were speaking very high of each other, and also Prime Minister Modi specifically correlating his vision of making India great again with the Making America Great Again vision of President Donald Trump. Whatever is happening at this particular point in time, has it to do with that correlation or the so-called self-perceived notion of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, or has it solely to do with that trade imbalance between India and the United States of America, which is of course in the favor of India, especially keeping in view that very transactional nature of the leadership of President Donald Trump? When we also talk about India purchasing Russian weapons and oil, is that the real trigger at this particular point in time between the two countries? Also, when we talk about India trying to violate Pakistan's sovereignty and territorial integrity, President Donald Trump has claimed more than 30 times by now that he was the one who brokered the ceasefire between the two nuclear-armed neighbors, a step which was, of course, welcomed by Pakistan, but India continues to deny that. Was that a cause to annoy President Donald Trump further down the lane? Also, Pakistan delivered a crushing defeat to India in that marka-e-haq, has that actually shattered the perception of India being the custodian or an agent of safeguarding the interests of the United States of America in this particular region? Also, there has been recorded evidence of India's involvement of state sponsorship of terrorism, particularly in the Western countries, both in Canada, in the United States of America. Has the world leadership, particularly when you talk about the perception of the Western leadership, have they realized that the people at the helm of affair in India, which are running the largest so-called democracy in the world, when they have got the nukes and their approach is driven by Hindu extremist militant ideology that is known as Hindutva, they are not only a threat to regional peace and security, but also a real threat to international peace and security. All these important questions up for discussion. For that, we are honored to be joined in the studio by Dr. Usman Chohan. He's advisor economy at the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies and also a senior economist. Dr. Chohan, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to be joined by Dr. Salma Malik. She is expert foreign affairs. Dr. Salma, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by another participant. As he joins in, I'll be introducing him as well. Dr. Chohan, why the trade talks between the US and India failed despite 5 rounds of intense negotiations, and by looking at those very statements that came from Indian authorities' side, they were quite hopeful, and especially when other countries have actually struck that very particular trade deal with the United States of America. Why their trade deal couldn't sail through? What were those sticking points that actually brought this particular equation to this particular point?
Absolutely. You laid it out very well in your opening remarks. And the fundamental reason that India did not manage to secure a trade deal with the United States and things have come to where they have is 2 things. India was insincere and India was arrogant. And it thought that it could run rounds around America in a way that only they would gain from it and the US would not gain for it, and Trump has seen through it and it hasn't worked out. To understand this, you have to look at the trade profile of India. They run a $40 billion deficit with ASEAN countries. They run a $60 billion, almost $50 billion deficit with the GCC, so Saudi, Qatar, UAE. They run almost $60 billion with Russia, so 40, 50, 60, and they run a $90 billion deficit almost with China. So overall, they run massive deficits. There's another $10 billion deficit with Japan and another 10 with Korea, roughly. So their only surpluses are the EU and the United States, where it's 15 billion with the EU as a bloc and it's 45 billion with the US. So the US says, why is everybody running a surplus against India and we are not? We need to understand this. And he says that, no, I won't tolerate this until they come to me with a fair deal for America. There's no amount of IT services you can export to get away with this. And when India's tariff and non-tariff barriers were so high and they were not grudging on it in particular sectors such as agriculture, pharma, you name it, Trump said, you know what, 25% on that. Then, most recent announcement, 25% additional on this. And that comes because of the intransigence on the Russian oil. If you look at Russian oil's profile of who they export to, 50% goes to China, 40% is India, and that's about $48.6 billion. This is 2023 figures. And then another 10% elsewhere. So if they are making this racket, how are we supposed to put up with this when this is bankrolling the war machine that Russia uses? So seeing that India works at cross purposes because it's so arrogant, it thinks that it is a world power already, an idol that was smashed by the Pakistan Air Force very recently, it is going to come in for its pick. America is going to come in for its pick and say, you think you're that smart, you think you're that strong, enough with this. And therefore, 50% is where we're at now.
Okay, Dr. Salma, what's your understanding? Looking at this very low ebb of the relationship between these 2 countries, the leaders, specifically when we talk about President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India, and especially given the fact that he happened to be one of those world leaders who visited Washington right after President Donald Trump took over the office. And in the first term, they'd been also actually speaking very high of each other. What has actually, as per your understanding, led to this particular low ebb, which of course the analysts, there's so many voices are seeing this particular low ebb, one of the lowest as far as this particular bilateral relationship is concerned in decades?
I absolutely agree with the point Dr. Chohan has pointed out here, that India was arrogant. Narendra Modi, because of the type of treatment that he has been receiving from the Western quarters, especially with regards countering China. So he thought that he is invincible, he can get away with murder, he can get away with playing all sides and doing whatever he feels like doing. So there was a time when this was possible. I mean, under Biden, who was himself a very, very weak president, there were several things that India could afford dabbling in, especially post-Ukraine war and the way India did what it did. There were a lot of
Dr. Salma, I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. No, I'll have to stop you for a short while. I'll have to go for a quick break. After the break, we'll resume the discussion from here. For that, stay tuned. Welcome back to Views on News, and in today's program we are talking about the lowest ebb the bilateral relationship between the United States of America and India has hit. In the studio we are joined by Dr. Salma Malik and Dr. Usman Chohan, and Mr. G.R. Baloch, former ambassador, has just joined us through the video link. Mr. Baloch, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Dr. Salma, quickly, resuming from that particular point where we left from, please go ahead.
Yes, so what I was saying was that not only it was the arrogance that we have been talking about previously, it's also the fact that India's double talk and using initially non-alignment and so many other things, dabbling with both power blocks and getting away with the best has been the norm. But this time round, primarily it was the arrogance, it was also the high-handedness that really got Modi and India into a bind. Also the fact that when the May 2025 conflict took place and India sought ceasefire through the USA, and then it went on a very heavy campaign trying to deny the US role in that, and that kind of became a trigger effect that absolutely worsened the relations, and that kind of downslided the entire scenario since then.
So when you specifically talk about high-handedness, do we understand it in terms of its state sponsorship of terrorism, particularly when it has targeted?
Absolutely. You see, I mean, initially they did that in Canada. Yeah. In Pakistan, they have been doing it throughout. They did it, they're doing it, they'll keep doing it. Pakistan has been talking about it. Whosoever has listened to us, but no one has really helped us in really countering this notion. But they tried doing it in Canada, and their relations with Canadian authorities really worsened. And then they did that in the US, and the US at that time just slapped them on their back and did nothing much more than what was required. And now the US is realizing the enormity of how much the Indian ingress and India's distancing itself, trying to consider itself heavier than what it is, taller than what its stature is in this particular picture. Also the fact that we must not ignore, India has been overselling itself as the net security provider, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. And that bubble was burst when India, on its own turf, on its own self-created war, could not even sustain the war in its initial phases and ended up losing expensive Western infrastructure within a few hours of its self-imposed war. So that kind of questions Modi as well as India's stature as to can they really deliver the goods. And there's several things which are being talked about in the Western quarters, including Washington.
Right. Mr. G.R. Baloch, what's your understanding? What has been the immediate trigger when we saw both of these leaders speaking so high of each other, especially when we talk about the first term of President Donald Trump? Don't you think these problems were there at that particular point in time as well? Or these problems, as far as the American perspective about the Indian leadership and their handling of such issues, which have been mentioned a number of times repeatedly by President Donald Trump, weren't there before during his first term?
Thank you, Mr. Tehami. I think we have to see, I'll start with what their so-called Operation Sindoor did was take out that mosque, that clock that they were wrapped in. They had wrapped in their duplicity, their false narrative, their and wrong capacities that they had it, and assumptions that they had made. They oversold it. They used their expatriate community there as proxies. So this had to come down. This 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 mosque had to come down. It came down right at the time when they themselves exposed their own weaknesses, their own capacities, not only in terms of narrative alone, but in geostrategic terms, in their institutional weaknesses, and most of all, their competence to even handle those best of the best weapon that they had. So how could they then be given such an important responsibility to be the security provider in face of one of the most technologically advanced, most technically competent uh, China? This is one. I have another take on this. Why this has happened? I don't know. You may agree or the other. I think there is a strategic contradiction in this, because what other thing it did was their Operation Sindoor, that it showed the unpredictability and a propensity to go for quick victories and to miscalculate and to be unpredictable and uncontrollable. So I think the decision makers in Washington probably saw that how could you give this whole region, Indian Ocean, such an important theater of war for them, diplomatic as well as military and geostrategic and geoeconomic, to a country which is now, of course, controlled by yeah, yeah.
Point very well. This particular second point, very respectfully, I just want your understanding regarding as to quick decision making, the unpredictability as far as Indian approach during this entire saga is concerned, as far as the dynamics of South Asian region is concerned. But when we talk about the kind of leadership President Donald Trump also comes up with, the unpredictability that is so much talked about with that particular leader of the United States of America, and especially when we talk about that very unpredictable element that came to the fore when he had threatened Iran, and he gave that particular certain deadline of 15 days or 2 weeks, and then he came up with the decision of striking and involving the United States of America, of directly hitting the Iranian nuclear site, so unpredictably, much earlier from that very deadline that he had put forth for Iranians. So don't you think
Yeah, I
on
mean,
this particular front,
now,
they can be put in sort of an equal basket, the approach of the Indian leadership and then that unpredictability with President Donald Trump's decision making?
yeah, I know this is, but that unpredictability is within a certain geostrategic framework. But now, since we were talking about India, and this is something which I don't know, it has not been discussed, that would it be only a personal slight by Modi to Trump that they will abandon such a so-called strategic partner in this region? No, I don't think so. I think the risk and unpredictability in terms of putting the entire population of their population and this region into peril of a nuclear war. That is their now biggest worry. And in fact, the US president himself has been saying, and other officials, that if they had not intervened, the region was all set to go for a Armageddon in a nuclear.
I get your point. Building upon this very particular point, their decision of bringing the entire region into a sort of a situation that could have actually threatened not only regional peace and security, but also could also threaten the global peace and security. After that ceasefire was reached, and India approached itself, asking the US authorities to intervene and ask Pakistan to stop that very retaliation that Pakistan so justifiably did as per its right of self-defense against Indian aggression. More than 30 times, US President Donald Trump has taken the credit of brokering that particular ceasefire between the two countries. There's been a continuous pattern of denial on the part of the Indian authorities. Do you think that denial has also added insult to injury for the Indian authorities here?
Yeah, indeed, indeed. I think this is one of the biggest, uh, I would say, diplomatic, political, uh, 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 I would say, blunder they have themselves put into in such an embarrassing situation. I don't know how to describe. A country of that size and posing to be the future, perhaps, and they want to have a seat on the major table on the UN Security Council, and then we see there's such a kind of diplomacy going in this haywire, their relationship just crumbling over something which is avoidable to some of their own people. That had India, if it is, this is the personal pick between Modi and Trump, which I don't believe that this is, yes, it was adding insult to the injury, but actually is much more fundamental. The decision makers in NATO, the decision makers in the West have very well now gauged the capacity, the institutional capacity, their military capacity, and most of all, their kind of sense of responsibility, which comes with this kind of a big role that they want to play. So I think what we will see in the future, which I see, is that probably India would be put to its place, that yes, you can have your own man, your own house, but we will not outsource, because now Trump is...
Your point, Mr. Baloch, unfortunately, we're short of time. I'll come back to you for a number of other aspects as well. Dr. Salma, Dr. Chohan, if you allow me, a very quick point related to this one. Dr. Salma, when we talk about the personal kind of relationship between the leaders of such high ranks, when they have developed that over the number of years, when President Donald Trump says, when one of those friends says that I played the part in a dispute, that you were so badly locked in and I helped you out in that, and they're not ready to accept that my friend helped me out in that, and they've continued to deny that particular assistance or the help that came from a friend.
Absolutely.
How bad or an adverse impact such a denial of a friend's help in the international arena play?
When we talk about conflict resolution, the biggest dilemma in a third-party mediation usually is that either the two parties consider the third party as a biased actor, or they don't listen to the third actor and they lose face in the international community, depending on the stature of the third party. It becomes a very, very strong case for losing your respect, losing your space, losing your image as an honest broker, and there's so many things which are attached to it. Now, interestingly, there was a time when Pakistan would ask the US to intervene and show reason to the Indians regarding Kashmir or any other issue, and the Indians would call the Americans biased. And after the 1998 nuclearization, and especially since Kargil, it have been the Indians who have always used the US card against Pakistan, and they've always considered US to be on their side, which the US has actually showed its very strong biases. We could see that happening in Pulwama as well. And the US and the Indians really, really enjoyed this particular honeymoon. And this time, to save their soul, they asked the US to help them broker the ceasefire, which the US did. And the very next moment, you find the Indians saying, oh, why has the US taken the glory away from us? Which means a loss of faith for the US, a lot of disrespect, a lot of insult, and adding insult to the injury, the Indian envoys going worldwide, trying to sell the case in a very different fashion, and also demeaning the US stature as a broker in this particular
so from that particular point onwards, your brief and quick answer, for which I'll take your detailed view later on, reaching to this particular point, not accepting and the trust deficit that has been created, the wedge that has been put in by India itself. Is there any sort of a damage control from here onwards for India, yes or no?
the damage has really been done. This won't really salvage the case, and India has actually made it very sure to add insult to the injury. So it's not only the injury, but there has been additional very heavy work in this direction.
What that heavy work could be?
Actually, Modi, in order to salvage his reputation, played the card very wrongly. And he said, oh, the Americans have done this, and the Americans tried to dictate us, and see, we have done this and this. And that has totally backfired.
Yeah. Dr. Usman Chohan, I see your pardon for keeping you for a little bit longer. When we talk about the impact of this 50% total tariffs that have been imposed now by US President, how do you think Indian economy is going to be affected?
It's an excellent question. It's multidimensional. First of all, the oligarchs that run India, about 7 oligarchs, they will face a lot of revenue cuts to their industry. So they will lose relative power compared to other rivals. The second is, with 50% tariffs, you'll see massive job losses, particularly in northern India. Wherever they do have industry along the coast and stuff, it'll be decimated. And they have already such a significant youth unemployment problem in India. You have hundreds of thousands of people applying for a single job. In that condition, this is what. And if India were to relent and let America come in and into industry sectors like agriculture, I think East Punjab would just secede from India, because that would decimate the agriculture there. You just have such a big problem. There's a big communal element to the sectors that India is trying to protect from American intrusion.
And there's already been so much resentment as far as farmers in India are concerned. There have been massive protests going on in India, which became literally difficult for Indian authorities to control.
Yeah, exactly right. And those are the people that will be back on the streets. And this time they wouldn't stop at the border of Delhi. They would just. So these are the kinds of serious problems that India faces. And yet it has brought up this arrogance. It doesn't concede to the fact that the United States saved India from the fury of Pakistan. And in addition, economically, as I mentioned, they run a deficit with everybody. 40 billion ASEAN, 50 billion GCC, 60 billion Russia, 90 billion China. And this is their main surplus, 45 billion with the US. They're going to lose this. Well, it doesn't matter to America, because India is America's 10th biggest partner. They have 9 other regions to deal with before they even worry about India. So India has overplayed its card, and it's going to face another bout of fury, this time not in the skies, but in their wallets.
So speaking specifically of Indian import of Russian oil, that happens to be 36% of overall oil imports India does have. That 36% comes from, that happens to be around 2 million barrels of crude oil per day from Russia. Now, specifically in this executive order, a post on Truth Social, just most recently by President Donald Trump, he's specifically been talking about India purchasing Russian oil, and in that way, he's fueling that particular war of Russia in Ukraine. Do you think India is in a position at this particular point in time to concede, to save its relationship with the US by not purchasing that 36% of oil from Russia? Is it in a position now?
Yes, well, it's damned if it does and damned if it doesn't, because this 36% of their requirements are Russian, but it's 40% of the overall Russian exports of oil are India. They're damned if they do it and damned if they stop this, they would create even more problems for themselves, like where the global energy markets would go haywire. But if they do concede at this point, Trump is still furious with them, so they lose either way now. The worst type of negotiator is that one that puts themselves in a position where they lose either way, and India is in that position where it doesn't have a bargaining hand with America and doesn't have enough bargaining in the world markets. So what are they going to do now?
So what sort of an impact do you think this particular statement with the Ministry of External Affairs of India is going to have when it throws it on the face of US authorities? Quote, the US has actively encouraged it to buy Russian oil so that the global crude prices, which you just referred to, would stay under control, where the West could reduce its dependence on Russian energy.
The Indians are making a decent point that they helped to stabilize by doing this at the behest of America, and that.
But that was under Biden administration, as far as I remember.
Correct, and the EU does import more. So India is pointing to West's double standards. The West is nothing but double standards. We know that, but India is not in that position to be able to force the hand of the West. The West is in that position to force the hand. Trump sees himself as a peacemaker. He made peace between India and Pakistan. India won't accept it. That's the problem with this narrative. You're attacking Trump at multiple levels, and Trump can attack India much more. That is the fundamental problem. The economic profile of India was not strong enough to put up with this sort of nonsense, and you should not be listening to the External Affairs Ministry of India. You should be listening to the Reserve Bank of India, the Ministry of Finance of India. They have a very different opinion about this
What
stuff.
about Modi himself? The world economy is going through many apprehensions. There is an atmosphere of instability now. Whatever we buy, there should be only one scale. We will buy those things which have been made by the sweat of an Indian.
I don't know what is made with the sweat of an Indian. The global supply chains are very integrated, and the way that global protectionism is being reshaped, there are many levels at which America resents India. Not just this Modi stuff, not just this trade deficit. The MAGA movement hates the fact that H-1B1 visas are given 80% to Indians to undercut tech labor wages in America. There are so many levels at which India has grievances against India that it downplayed for the net security provider stuff we were just talking about. That's not going to pull it. America can bring more resentments to the table and hit India even harder. This is just, I say this is just the beginning. 50%, it can go even higher, and India won't be able to tolerate it.
Right. Mr. Baloch, what's your understanding? Is there any sort of way out from here for the Indians, especially given the fact, the kind of statement they've come up with, the kind of response? They've termed this particular move by the US as unjustified and unreasonable, also pointing fingers back at the US that it encouraged it to buy more Russian oil to keep the prices, global oil prices under control, and also making a hit at the US that it continues to import chemicals and fertilizers from Russia.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think now whatever India says will be taken, and that is how we take it, as a damage control, and also to put the blame on the other party. But one point I want to make it here, which was not my exactly, it is how some of the analysts now say in India that Modi, because of his own ego, has sacrificed the interest of its own country. In fact, one of the analysts was saying that probably in the cabinet, it was suggested to him that he may concede that India did request US for the ceasefire. But they say nobody can say him no, because that is how he decided that he wanted to give that message of being a very strong leader, a leader who, and also that he wanted to sell the narrative of victory and a false victory in Sindoor. So I think the problem is Modi himself. He is a problem for the Indians, he's a problem for the region, and he's a problem for the world. I've been saying it even on your program that he is a threat to India in terms of now economic disaster, and also the possible nuclear disaster, military disaster, and now I think overall prestige of India that he had so-called built it, that is all gone. So I think this gentleman has to go along with his coterie of yes men that who now govern India, a fascist regime that we always term.
So do I understand from this that there is an international consensus that is already developed as far as India being ruled by a country that has an approach that is Hindutva driven, that Hindu supremacist militant ideology, and also with the kind of high-handedness, the state sponsorship of terrorism on the foreign soils India has been involved in, its serving armed forces personnel, its intelligence agency have been involved in that particular. So with that consensus now developed, do you think these moves are leading into a direction where India and ultimately this region and the entire world would get rid of such type of people who are trying to bring hostility around the globe with their actions?
Yeah, indeed. See, India has become a pariah state in real terms. For Iran, they sent spies of Israelis to go and target their leadership. So imagine what would happen between Iran and India. China, they have a kinetic kind of conflict now. With Pakistan, of course, we just fought a war. So this is the region. Now, the only other power which they were depending on America, and we see is all gone. So now, practically, India is a pariah under this, unless Indian leadership Indian people get rid of this regime, they come up with some new idea of being in peace within and without, that they first of all have to find peace within. They have to stop persecuting Muslims and the minorities. They have to first of all be the tolerant India that their forefathers had said. Be secular as their constitution dictates them to be. Be in peace with the neighbors. Let SARC develop as a regional institution, and don't get into this arms race that they are forcing us to do, and they themselves, despite the fact that there at least 40-50%, 50-60% people are under poverty line, and we are also struggling with it. So I think a new charter of peace has to be visualized, has to be dealt with, and we have to address that lobby in India, that part of the segment of the society of India who are now craving for normalcy within their own country, and they want India to get out of this war hysteria in which they have been kept for the last now over 10 years, 14 years now. So I think this Hindutva tola has to go out of power, and that only the Indians can do it, and they must do it. Yeah.
Right, Mr. Baloch, your understanding as far as Russia's statement, the Kremlin has come up with a statement saying New Delhi can choose its own trade partners. It's been silent throughout this particular spat between US and India. How do you look at the timing of this particular statement and the content of it? What sort of an impact do you think it can have on the overall equation?
It validates what my assumption is, that India is a pariah state now. So because they played their role, the ugly role of being against everybody, just for that assumption being a big actor in the court. So I think this is what I think comes when the diplomacy is based on false narratives. Diplomacy is based on duplicity. I mean, we were taught as a diplomat that diplomacy is not duplicity. It is about credibility. So I think India has lost credibility as a nation which can be trusted. So I think it's lost its trust of the international community, and especially its own old and new friends that they found. So I think it is the most clumsy way of handling the diplomacy of a country of 1.4 billion people and such a large landmass. So I think it's a total failure.
Mr. Baloch, former ambassador, joining us on the video link. Thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News. Really appreciate that. Dr. Salma, quickly, by looking and analyzing this particular statement by the External Ministry of India, is it actually the damage control happening, or they are throwing the things right at the face of the American leadership? No,
I think the Indians, whatever they had planned, is really going up in flames, and they're in a state of panic. They're trying to do damage control. They're also trying to uplift the Modi regime's image. Modi has his own monsters to fight with. The parliament is up in arms against him. The CDS has already claimed, Pakistan modestly is saying 6 aeroplanes plus 1, and they're saying 7 outright. And so much is happening in India that they really don't know which string to catch and from where to start the story. So it's time for India to take a pause. It's time for India to be introspective and realize how much falsification that they have spun.
Are we anticipating a regime change there?
One can only hope so. Modi is fast losing his popularity. However, one only fears, because there is as such no solid opposition to the BJP. The Congress is still yet to consolidate itself in a situation.
But don't you think they have really capitalized on this particular real saga?
They have, but a lot depends on how the vote base turns out to be. If Modi's replacement turns out to be worse than what Modi was, then everyone is in for a lot of trouble. The region, the Indians themselves, what these people, these ultra-nationalists are doing to their own country people don't even realize the type of damage it is doing to India's image and secularism. That is long gone.
Right, Dr. Chohan, very quickly, very briefly, as to when President Donald Trump announced the trade deal struck with Pakistan, he referred to India, that when US is going to help Pakistan to develop massive oil reserves, perhaps Pakistan would be selling oil to India one day. Now, opportunities for Pakistan from this particular saga that has unfolded between the US and India.
Well, there are industries.
In terms of economic opportunities.
Yes, there are industries where we do compete. For example, in textiles, and the fact that we have a lower tariff already advantages us. You know, for the last 25 years, I've been hearing people say that we should consider trade with India, and I warned them exactly about what Trump is telling you right now, that there would be tariff and non-tariff barriers that would make it so difficult. So be careful about the idea of trade with India. Now you're seeing it in real time, and the President of the United States is telling you it's a terrible idea. So keep that in mind.
Dr. Usman Chohan, Advisor Economy at the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies and Senior Economist, thank you very much for your time. Dr. Salma, Malik, Foreign Affairs Expert, thank you very much for your time, ma'am. Also for being with us on the show tonight, really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.